Okay, so today's going to be a relatively short live. We're going to cover what is the most important number in all of investing, and that is your rate of return. And so there's going to be a number of ways that we can measure that. Some are good, some are bad, and some are going to give us more information, some are going to give us less information. They all have some value, but we're going to go through a few of the main ways to measure returns and why it's so important that you do that. And so you really do need to define what your target return is. And, that's going to be a personal decision, and it's usually based on what level of risk you're willing to take. Typically, the higher the risk, the higher the reward, right? So for flipping, for instance, if you're taking on a project where you're going to have to redo the entire house, right? It's going to be very complex, almost an entire full renovation. That's probably going to get you a higher profit margin and a higher return, but it's also going to be a lot more complicated. It could potentially take longer, and again, you're taking more risk, right? And so that will give you typically higher rewards, but you have to evaluate what level of risk you're willing to give to get that reward. And so again, we're going to just harp again. Creativity is going to pay the highest margins, right? Adding value is going to pay the highest margins. So again, complexity is part of the way we do that. And so as investors, we are risk allocators, meaning that we are deciding where to put risk in its most valuable place, right? So we want to have the least amount of risk for the most amount of reward. And so once you have this framework for yourself in place, what you're willing to do and what your target returns are, you can use that to actually compare properties when you have more than one deal and you're deciding between deals. Or if you're just deciding whether a deal is worth doing at all, you can use these formulas that we're about to go through to evaluate whether or not that will meet your criteria. And so, the most important number, again, is the measure of return. It's crazy how many people just skip over this. But so there's really three ways that we measure returns, right? So, and there's maybe other ways, but these are the three main ways. So the first is gross profit. So gross profit, I don't know if you guys can read that. Sorry, my handwriting sucks. But gross profit is very simple. It's just your total cash out minus your total cash in. Gross profit. Okay, so for example, if you bought a property for 100K, right? You used 80K of financing, right? So your total cash in was 20K, right? At the purchase. Then you added another 20K of renovations. So your total investment, your total cash in was 40K. Okay, so that's going to be your cash in number here. And then let's just say you sold the house for 140K. Right? So you have to pay back the loan, the lender, right? So you have minus 80, which gives you a cash out of 60. So in this case, your cash out is 60 minus your cash in of 40. That's going to give you a gross profit of 20K. Right? Does that all make sense? If you have questions on how that works, leave them in the comments. So that's pretty simple. So let's hang on to this number, this 20K return, right, on 40K invested. Because that brings us to our next number, which is called a total return percentage. And so that's very similar to this, is it's just going to be your cash out minus your cash in, right? So your gross profit divided by your cash in. So in this case, going back to our other example, right, we had put in 40K. We had, so our gross profit was 20, right? So we had gotten out 60, we had put in 40, right? Put in 40, so that would be 20K divided by 40K, which equals, 50%. So 50% return, that's a pretty good return for a flip. And so the benefits to this is, so gross profit, right, that's obviously giving you your total dollars out. Very important number for you to know. You have to make sure that you're getting more money out than you're putting in, right? Otherwise the deal doesn't make sense. But what that doesn't tell us is, it doesn't tell us anything about the profitability versus the investment, right? So if you put in $1 million and you got out $20,000, that's not a very good investment. But if you put in, $40,000 and you get out 20, that's a great investment. And so that's why this total return percentage is important. But what this is even missing actually is a time aspect, right? So there's no time included in this aspect. So this is just your total return, but let's just say it took you 2 years to get this return, right? So your annual return is actually going to be much less than 50. And so that brings us to our next measure, and this is really the best measure, and the number you should be using is your IRR, which stands for internal rate of return. And so what this does is it's a complicated formula that essentially measures the annualized rate of return of your project, and it allows you to compare project as it takes into account time, right? So if your project is getting 50% a year, that's going to compound, and that's going to be better than 50%, over the course of 2 years. Does that make sense? Right? So if your project has a 50% IRR, and it's a 2-year project, that means you got 50% return each year. And so the way that we're actually going to measure that, the easiest way to do it is actually in an Excel formula, and I'll post another video about how to use that. It's not very easy to calculate by hand. At the very least, you probably need a calculator. And but what it really is measuring is the growth rate of your project, right? So let's just take a set of cash flows, right? So in year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. So in year 1, you're investing $10. You're getting back $1, $1, $10. Right? So in these two returns, right, our gross profit is $2. Our total return is 20%. But our IRR, I don't know what it is off the top of my head, but it's going to be very low, right? Because you're making that 20% over the course of 4 years. So that's why it's super important to understand what your IRR is, because it's going to take into account how long you think the project is going to take and how much money you have to invest into it, any cash flows that you're going to get in the interim, and any expenses that you're going to pay in the interim. And so it's going to give you a much more inclusive number than either of these two, and it's also going to take into aspect that time. So that's why it's important to use IRR versus the other ones. And again, I will post a video in the group about how to use Excel to calculate that, and I'll also do it in Google Sheets for those of you who don't like to use Excel. Okay, great. Thanks, guys.